The silence in the room was so profound that Avery could hear the sound of her heart beating out of sync. All eyes were on her, waiting for a failure, a mistake. The pressure was overwhelming, stronger than anything she had ever faced. There, she was at the heart of NASA, with her old notebook and the weight of a crushing accusation. She doesn't belong here. She knew that everyone expected her to falter, to fail to solve the problem, to not be capable of doing what was necessary. But she had no choice. She couldn't fail. What no one knew was that Avery wasn't just a country girl with a thick accent. She carried a silent strength, a determination that came from something bigger than anyone could see. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the screen that displayed the critical error. The solutions were crumbling around her. No technology, no computer or advanced equipment could help her now. It was just her notebook, and the knowledge she carried within her. The room was in absolute silence. Everyone was waiting for her to fail, for her to give in to the pressure. But deep inside, Avery knew this was her chance to prove herself. She had made a silent promise to her grandfather, a promise that she would never give up. And at that moment, her mother's words echoed in her mind. "You were born to be there. Trust in what God has placed inside you." She stood up, requesting only chalk and a whiteboard. Deep down, she knew this wouldn't be just about solving the problem. It would be about showing everyone there that true brilliance doesn't come from technology or resources. It comes from within, from a heart that refuses to be defeated. As she began to draw on the board, the silent critiques became a distant noise. The only sound that mattered was the rhythm of her own handwriting, tracing solutions, doing something no computer could replicate. Each line, each number was a statement. She was here to stay. As the calculations aligned and the solution emerged before her eyes, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The tense climate started to dissipate, replaced by a silence of respect. Avery knew that the answer she was providing would be more than just a technical solution. It was the answer to a journey of doubts, fears, and challenges. But what she hadn't expected was that, in the end, that solution would not only change the course of the test, but the course of her destiny there. And as the audience watched, the coordinator's gaze met hers. He didn't need to speak. The recognition was in his eyes. Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey. Avery landed in Houston with the lightness of someone who still didn't know the weight she carried. Her simple backpack seemed like an insignificant burden, but to her it was all she had. With wide, curious eyes, she looked around, absorbing every detail of the place so far from Camden. The glow of the city lights seemed to promise something she couldn't yet name. But at the same time, there was something unsettling about those busy streets, something that made her wonder if she really belonged there. At the NASA dormitory, the scene wasn't much different. The girls were busy chatting amongst themselves, as if they were in a more modern version of a parallel universe. Designer luggage, loud laughter, and stories of exchanges in Europe filled the air. Avery, with her simple jeans and an old leather-bound notebook, didn't fit in. Her southern accent stood out like a mark she couldn't hide, and it didn't go unnoticed by the other girls. Chloe, Madison, and Sierra exchanged glances as soon as she entered the room. Their words were like blades, sharp and disguised as smiles. "Country girl," Chloe whispered, and all the others laughed, but not sincerely. Avery, feeling the weight of their gaze, lowered her eyes. What she felt was clear. Not only was the environment new, but she was the outsider in the midst of that elite. But deep inside, a thin thread of courage began to grow. She didn't know how, but she didn't want to give in to the discomfort of those whispering voices. The tension grew, expanding like a bubble about to burst. Avery walked into the dormitory alone, where the night's light illuminated only a corner of the desk. With trembling hands, she took the star brooch from her pocket and placed it there in front of her as a point of anchorage. She looked out the window at the sky, feeling the vastness of the universe beyond, so distant and yet so close. "Do I really belong here?" she thought, her gaze fixed on the stars, searching for an answer that for now didn't come. The group dynamic started early in the morning with a cordial smile that barely hid the tension in the air. Avery found herself in a cold room with white walls and lights that were too bright, a place where voices seemed to reverberate, making the silence feel even heavier. The rich girls, with their tablets and the latest NASA collection outfits, were at ease, while Avery clutched her notebook with the firmness of someone who didn't want to get lost in so much newness. When the question about orbital dynamics was asked, Avery didn't hesitate. With impressive clarity, she laid out the concepts in a simple, straightforward manner, as if math and physics were old friends who had been by her side forever. But as she finished, she noticed something. Their eyes were on her. Madison, with Val. A forced smile was the first to speak, interrupting her without even trying to hide the mockery. "That's quite interesting, but you know, if you had studied at a place like Harvard, you might have more knowledge to dive a little deeper, don't you think?" The restrained laughter of the other girls made Avery's chest tighten. She knew she hadn't made a mistake, but the way she was treated made her doubt, even if just for a second, whether it had all truly been just luck. Val, who was sitting next to her, noticed the defeated look in Avery's eyes and quietly moved closer, gently touching her shoulder. "Don't mind them, Avery. They're just scared that you know more than they do. Trust yourself. I know you've got this." But in that moment, Avery's confidence seemed to slip away like sand through her fingers. The shine of those girls, with their expensive devices and confident smiles, contrasted with the quieter yet truer shine she felt within herself. As she left the lab, the laughter of the other girls still echoed in her mind. "It's just beginner's luck." Avery stopped in the hallway, her footsteps echoing alone against the walls. Her heart beat faster now, as if it were about to explode. But she composed herself. None of that could define who she was. When she lifted her head and saw Val approaching, she smiled, albeit timidly. The battle was still far from over, but she knew there was something in her chest that no laughter could take away. There was still something inside, a quiet strength, that she was beginning to understand better. Nightfall came quietly, bringing with it an unexpected weight. Avery was alone in her room, the only light coming from her phone screen reflecting her tired face. She had spent the day trying to fit in, trying to prove herself worthy, but with every glance, with every word, it seemed like the world around her wanted to deny her presence there. The silence in the room was oppressive, more than any mockery. From the girls, it felt as if she were adrift in the void, a distant star that no one else could see. Then her phone vibrated. The screen lit up the darkness, and when she looked, Avery saw the message from her mother. A simple sentence, but it seemed like a beacon in the storm. "You were born to be there. Trust in what God has placed inside you." Luke 1:37, Avery. Sat in silence, staring at those words. Something inside her stirred. The fear that had gripped her chest began to dissipate, even if just a little. She knew she wasn't alone, that this silent faith, which she carried like a secret, was her true strength. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension that had built up since the moment she set foot in that place. Val entered the room without making a sound, carrying 2 chocolates. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She knew. Avery's face said it all, but as always, Val had a way of making words feel like comfort, without promising easy solutions. "You know more than all of them put together. You just need to show it, Avery. This will pass, and when it does, you'll be proof that what matters isn't what people think of you, but what you think of yourself." Avery looked at Val and smiled faintly, the light in her eyes rekindling. Val had always been her anchor, the one who reminded her of who she was when the world started telling her otherwise. For the first time that night, she felt that maybe it was possible to continue. She wasn't here to please anyone. She was here to prove to herself that she was capable. She closed her eyes, absorbing her mother's message and Val's words, and, like a nearly imperceptible sigh, She whispered to herself, "I didn't come all this way to turn back." Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different. No longer oppressive, but one of deep, serene understanding. Avery knew what she needed to do, and despite all the doubts and fears, she was ready to take the next step. The following morning was heavy with a tension that was hard to hide. Avery was used to working alone, to being her own guide, but in this environment, everything seemed to scream for her to fit in, to become something she wasn't. The team dynamic was relentless. The others, with their technologies and ways of doing things, seemed so at ease, so confident. Avery, on the other hand, felt like a shadow, a spectator in her own story. That day, the simulation exercise had a big, complex challenge, and everyone knew it would be a crucial test. Every movement, every decision would be scrutinized under a microscope. The team was divided, and once again Avery found herself pushed to the back, her voice barely audible in the face of the others. But what she didn't know, and what no one else knew, was that Avery's silence carried within it the strength of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, even if the others didn't believe it. During the exercise, she quietly began to lead the team, without fanfare, without asking for permission. The calculations, the predictions, were all based on her intuitive knowledge, not on expensive technologies. She kept quiet, simply observing, waiting for the right moment to act. That's how she worked in Camden, at home, where the answers never came from a tablet or a screen, but from practice, reasoning, memory. When the team got lost in a solution that seemed obvious to Avery, she calmly corrected it, without any sense of superiority, but with the certainty of someone who knew they were doing the right thing. At the end of the simulation, Avery's solution was what saved the task. But as expected, Chloe, always the first to seize any situation, didn't hesitate to take credit, as if it had been her idea from the beginning. Avery swallowed hard, feeling the frustration rise in her throat, but remained silent. She knew deep down that everyone knew the truth. The problem was, no one was willing to acknowledge it. In the hallway after the activity, the sound of her own footsteps seemed to echo like a sad song. She was about to leave when one of the instructors approached. He had a different look, serious. He didn't say anything immediately, but his silence spoke more than any words could. "I'd like to talk to you after the last round," he said in a calm but firm voice. Avery felt her chest tighten. This was the moment to prove to herself that it didn't matter how many times she was ignored or underestimated. She was here for something bigger. When the instructor walked away, Avery looked at the wall in front of her, her eyes fixed on an invisible point, and realized something. She was starting to become who she had always been meant to be, but there was still something in the air, something that made her feel that this was not the end. Something was about to happen, and she didn't know exactly what, but she could feel it. The next step wouldn't be easy. Nothing would be easy, but Avery was starting to realize that this journey, with all its cracks and scars, would be the one that made her shine. The days leading up to the final grade announcement were marked by a series of relentless tests. There were evaluations of every kind: technical, behavioral, individual, and group assessments. Each one seemed more challenging than the last, pushing Avery's limits in different ways. She faced orbital dynamics simulations, complex problem-solving sessions, and even tests under stressful conditions, where the pressure was palpable. In each of those moments, she stood out in a quiet way, without drawing attention, but always with a consistency that didn't go unnoticed. Her results were always the best, but it was never her who boasted about it. Instead, Avery observed, absorbed, and acted with precision, as if she already knew what to do before the question was even formulated. It was as if she were in tune with everything happening around her, seizing every opportunity without ever drawing attention to herself. And this, more than anything else, sparked the ire of her rivals. Chloe, Madison, and Sierra watched in fury as Avery, without asking for permission, took charge of the teams when necessary, corrected the mistakes, of the other girls without expecting recognition, and gave precise answers to questions that made others hesitate. Every silent victory of hers seemed to burn more intensely for the rivals, who couldn't understand how someone like Avery, with her accent, her simple backpack, and her old notebook, could stand out in such an environment filled with privilege and status. The atmosphere between them grew heavier with each passing day. Madison, always the most vocal, didn't hesitate to shoot Avery sideways glances and murmur ironic comments whenever she spoke. Chloe and Sierra, on the other hand, united in a kind of silent sabotage, trying to undermine Avery's confidence at every small opportunity. They couldn't let that country girl win. But Avery, with her quiet faith and unwavering determination, remained constant, and that was the detail they hated most. Finally, the big moment arrived. The coordinator stepped onto the stage, and the murmurs in the hall quieted instantly. All eyes turned to him. Avery, still holding her notebook, felt like she was on the edge of an invisible abyss. The words that would come next could define everything she had lived through until now. The fear, which had been under control, began to seep in, but she focused. It wasn't about what others thought. It was about what she knew she deserved. The coordinator began announcing the results, calling the participants one by one. The heat in the room seemed to intensify as he neared the end. When it finally came to Avery's turn, the silence was absolute. And then her name was called. She was the first place winner. The impact of the news was like a silent blow. Not just to Avery, but to everyone else. The rivals who had invested so much in trying to bring her down were in shock. Their pale faces, their wide eyes of disbelief, were the reflection of a victory they had never imagined. But there was no time to celebrate. Before Avery could even move, the whispers began. "She cheated," Madison whispered, as if it was a relief for her frustration. "Her mom works as a cleaner at NASA," Chloe said with a forced smile, trying to convince everyone of something no one else believed. The rumor spread like wildfire, and suspicious looks began to multiply. Avery felt the weight of the accusation like a sharp blade, ready to cut the root of her victory. But before the words could hit her irreparably, a familiar voice appeared beside her. Val, with her calm smile, held her hand. "Ignore them. They're afraid of you. Their fear is what got you here. It wasn't luck, Avery, it was you, only you." Val's voice was a point of calm amidst the chaos, and it was at that moment that Avery realized the only thing that mattered was the journey she was on. Not the accusations, not the provocations. What truly mattered was how much she believed in herself. And for that reason, she was ready for the next step, even if the road ahead would be even more difficult. The coordinator then approached her with a more serious look. He knew what was happening. He knew something needed to be done. He turned to the audience and, in a firm voice, declared, "Avery, due to pressure from the other participants, we'd like you to retake a test. Live, now." The hall fell silent immediately. All eyes were on Avery. The challenge was set. But she didn't falter. She knew what she had to do. The tension in the air was palpable. The silence of the room seemed to echo, amplified by the pressure of everyone's eyes on Avery. She knew what was at stake. This test, live and on the spot, would be her last chance to prove she deserved to be there. And no one, not even the accusations, could take that from her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions stirring within her. Deep down, one thing was clear. She wasn't going to back down, not now, not anymore. The instructors moved around the room, adjusting the setup of the simulation, tweaking monitors and keyboards. Everything was against her, a symphony of technology that seemed so distant from Avery's simple way of working. She only had her notebook, a whiteboard, and a piece of chalk. The cutting-edge technology surrounding her seemed like a world apart, but she knew she could handle it. What she had, what no one else seemed to possess, was a sharp mind and a memory honed over the years in Camden. What she was about to do would be more about what she knew than what the technology could offer. When the simulated situation was presented, something went wrong. The orbital simulation system failed, and the room filled with uncomfortable tension. The coordinator and the evaluators began moving hastily, trying to fix the problem, but Avery quickly realized it wouldn't be that simple. The solutions being offered were leading them into a dead end. That's when she raised her hand, asking for something no one else had asked for: a whiteboard and chalk. The evaluator's looks were immediate, but nothing compared to what she felt within herself. It was as if a door had opened in her mind. She knew exactly what to do. With the chalk in hand, she began to draw. Trajectories, equations, and diagrams started to form quickly on the board, each line and number connecting, precisely as if she were sketching the map for a possible future, the one she had always imagined for herself. The silence in the room grew with each of her movements, as if the entire environment was waiting to see what she would do next. The coordinator and evaluators watched in silence. Avery kept going, undisturbed by the weight of their gaze. She was beyond that. She was solving the problem. The solution she was drawing on the board wasn't just an answer to the technical failure, it was a silent affirmation of who she truly was. When she made the final stroke on the board, something in the room shifted. The air seemed lighter, the tension slowly dissipating. The coordinator, who had been motionless until then, looked at the board and then at her. There was no more room for doubt. What she had done was indeed a superior solution. One of the evaluators, who had been silent until that moment, approached the monitor and, with a surprised sigh, validated what Avery had done. She had solved the problem, without computers, without advanced technology, just her mind and what she carried with her. But the coordinator said nothing. He looked at the board, at her, and then turned to the other instructors. The silence that followed was thick. He didn't need to say anything more. Avery already knew what she had done. She had shown who she truly was. The silence after Avery's solution felt heavier than any sound could ever be. Everyone in the room was absorbing the impact of what had just happened. The bright, cold lights of the lab reflected off the evaluators' faces, whose eyes were now fixed on Avery. The coordinator, with his impassive expression, took a step toward the board where the lines and equations drawn by Avery were still fresh. Each number, each stroke, seemed to tell a story of perseverance, of someone who had faced the unknown and conquered it with their own mind. He stared at the board for a long moment, saying nothing. Time seemed to stop. The noise of the environment around them, the hum of computers and machines faded away, and all Avery could hear was the rapid beating of her own heart. With each passing second, the expectation grew. She knew what she had just done. She knew it wasn't just about solving the technical problem. She had overcome something much greater, the expectations of others and, more importantly, her own. The instructors remained silent, but their expressions were clear. They knew that the solution Avery had presented wasn't just a technical fix. It was a lesson in how true brilliance doesn't come from over-reliance on technology or cutting-edge materials, but from the ability to think, to connect with the problem, and solve it in a simple, direct, and effective way. After an endless pause, the coordinator finally broke the silence. He looked at Avery with a seriousness she had never seen before. But this time it wasn't a seriousness that made her shrink. It was a seriousness of recognition. He spoke, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. "This solution is superior to the one our own team suggested," he said calmly, and his voice carried a weight Avery never imagined hearing directed at her. The room seemed to fill with a new energy, stronger, lighter. Recognition was there, but there were no applause, no words of encouragement. But in the coordinator's gaze, she saw what she needed to see. It wasn't the others who would define her. It was herself. The path ahead of her was being illuminated by her own strength. She didn't move, didn't respond immediately. Everything around her seemed to move slower. The sensation of having achieved something much deeper than a simple technical approval was intoxicating. She had sent the message, and now she knew that nothing could take her away from the place she had earned. But before anything could resolve completely, the coordinator looked toward the back of the room and gestured for everyone to leave. Only Avery remained. The room was so silent it was possible to hear her own thoughts, like a distant echo. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt that something was about to occur. Something that would change her path here, and perhaps even her life. Avery looked once more at the board. The solution she had drawn was now more than just an equation. It was a statement of who she was, where she stood, and where she could go. When the coordinator finally turned to her, his eyes were like an unspoken question. "Let's talk, Avery," he said, his voice now softer. The days that followed were a mix of silent euphoria and deep reflection. Avery no longer doubted that her place there was secured. But something inside her, something she couldn't explain, prevented her from fully surrendering to the feeling of victory. There was still so much to achieve, so much to understand about herself, about what this experience meant to her and the future she was beginning to shape, without exactly knowing what it would look like. She was invited to give a speech at the program's closing ceremony, an honor few of her peers had the opportunity to achieve. The auditorium was packed, the light from those giant lamps creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. The large audience was filled with parents, instructors, and even journalists, all eager to hear from the young scientist from the countryside. Avery, however, wasn't interested in being recognized. She didn't want the spotlight. What she wanted was to share simply what had brought her to that point. When she took the stage, the murmurs of the audience ceased immediately. She felt small in the face of so many expectations, but she didn't let it shake her. She knew. What she had inside knew what she wanted to convey. With trembling hands, she took the microphone and looked out at the audience, trying to find a point of balance. She didn't want to sound forced. She wanted to be genuine. "I've learned a lot of science here," she began, her voice soft but firm. "But what really brought me here was what I learned from my mother. She taught me that it doesn't matter what the world says. What matters is what you believe about yourself. And more importantly, the courage to keep going, even when no one else believes in you." The eyes of the audience were fixed on her, and for a moment Avery felt as if she were sharing something personal, something deep. She wasn't just talking about science, but about what she considered to be her true mission there, showing that knowledge isn't just for those who have more, but for those who have the courage to fight, even when life seems to be against them. "I also learned a lot from my grandfather," she continued, now with a lightness in her voice. "He used to say that the stars don't choose who sees them. They shine no matter if anyone is looking. And I learned that, just like the stars, you don't need to look like them to shine like them. The shine comes from within." The audience was silent, absorbing those simple yet profound words. For Avery, that moment wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about stepping forward, about affirming to herself that she wasn't less than anyone, and that she had the right to occupy that space, just like anyone else. The shine she carried wasn't the result of luck, but of a life of overcoming and silent faith. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. But instead of a victorious smile, Avery felt something deeper. She felt that she had made the right choice, that this was only the beginning of something bigger. And, as the applause blended with the sound of the crowd, she knew that the greatest prize wasn't that moment. It was everything that was yet to come, everything she would still achieve with humility, courage, and faith. However, as she descended from the stage, a familiar figure slowly approached. Chloe, with her eyes filled with an emotion hard to identify, was there waiting for her. The two exchanged few glances, but that shared silence was all they needed. Open-ending. Applauded and recognized, Avery thought everything was finally resolved. But a figure in the back of the room was slowly approaching. It was Chloe. What would this mean for their future? What was about to happen between the two of them? Avery still felt the weight of the words she had spoken on stage. It was as if, in some way, that moment had set her free. But as she left the grand ceremony, something unexpected happened. Chloe, the girl who had once sneered at and ridiculed, her was there, standing still, watching her with a strange look. The buzz of the audience had already faded, but as Avery looked at Chloe, she realized that the silence between them held something much deeper than any words could explain. Chloe, who had always been so confident, so sure of her place, now seemed vulnerable. There was a different energy in her posture, something broken that Avery couldn't immediately identify. But as she approached, Chloe looked at her with a serious expression, no trace of the usual mockery. Something in the words Avery had said had touched her in some way. "My mum wanted to be a scientist, but she always said this wasn't a place for women," Chloe said, her voice low, almost like a whisper lost in the air. Avery didn't know how to respond. Chloe's words didn't make sense to her at first. Why now, after everything, was she saying this? Avery knew that Chloe's arrogance had always come from a shadow of insecurity, but this was different. Chloe, for some reason, seemed to have opened up. Maybe she saw something in her now that she hadn't been able to see before. Avery remained silent, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to be rude, didn't want to fuel Chloe's frustration. Instead, she simply looked into her eyes, trying to understand what those words truly meant. "You can still," Avery finally said, her voice soft but filled with a sincerity that came from the depths of her heart. "It doesn't matter what you've heard. What matters is what you choose to believe now." There was a pause. Chloe stared at her for a few seconds, as if pondering the message Avery was trying to convey. The silence between them was now filled with something deeper, a kind of understanding they were both beginning to share. But before the moment could evolve into something more, Val approached Avery, her presence lighting up the air with her energetic vibe. "Did you see what's on the NASA website?" Val asked, clearly excited about the news. Avery looked at Val, confused, not sure what she meant. Val smiled, her eyes sparkling. "They're talking about you. Your project is going to be included in a mentorship program for young scientists. From the southern US, did you know that?" Avery felt the ground slip beneath her feet. This was the opportunity she had never imagined. Her name was being recognized for something much bigger than just her presence there. It was as if all the pieces of her destiny were finally falling into place. The recognition wasn't just about her, but everything she represented. Overcoming adversity, courage, and silent faith. And that meant she had achieved something real, something that would last far longer than any prize or applause. Chloe watched the scene from a distance, and Avery felt a moment of silent empathy between them. Their worlds were aligning in ways neither of them could have predicted, and maybe, just maybe, they had more in common than they would ever have imagined. The days following the news about the scientific mentorship program passed like a race, against time. Avery knew this meant something huge, something she had never imagined. She was being recognized for her talent, for her mind, not for her appearance, her accent, or her humble background. It felt as if suddenly the sky was the limit. But at the same time, there was something inside her that made her question, was she truly ready to handle all of this? On the last afternoon before heading to the mentorship program, Avery found herself with Val and some of the other girls all lying on the grass on a hill near the campus. The sky was clear with a few scattered clouds, and the soft wind brought a rare relief amid the summer heat. The girls talked about what the future held for each of them, but Avery felt a kind of peace she had never experienced before. She knew that no matter what happened, nothing could erase what she had already achieved. One of the girls, one of the youngest in the group, looked up at the sky and asked, "Were you ever afraid of failing?" Avery remained silent for a moment, looking at the stars beginning to appear one by one. The question seemed simple, but it touched on something deep inside her. It was hard to remember all the times she thought she might not be able to make it, that maybe fate had more to do with the people around her than with her own potential. But there, lying on the grass with the soft sounds of nature in the background, she realized that, although fear had been part of her journey, it had never been enough to stop her. She lifted her head, her eyes shining with newfound determination. Then, with a calm but firm voice, she responded, "I was, but I was more afraid of never trying." Her words echoed in the air like a truth finally finding its place. For Avery, fear had never been what held her back. What truly drove her was the fear of regret, of not giving her all, of not daring to be who she had always known she could be. The sound of a rocket countdown began to fill the silence of the night. It was a distant yet powerful vibration, seeming to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. Avery looked at Val, who smiled at her as, If she knew exactly what was happening in that moment, this wasn't just the victory of a young scientist, it was the victory of all the people who had believed in her, even when she doubted herself. The sky, which once seemed like a distant and unreachable place, was now closer than ever. And Avery knew, with all the certainty she possessed, that there were no limits to what she could achieve. The sky didn't belong to anyone. It was for those who dared to believe and move forward. Avery looked up at the now clear and starry sky, with the feeling that all the weight she had carried for so long was finally dissipating. She was no longer the country girl with her thick accent and simple notebook. She had become someone who defied expectations, someone who, despite all the adversities, had found the strength to move forward. The sky seemed closer now, as if somehow it had opened up for her, allowing her to take the place she had always known was hers, but that she had still been afraid to reach. With every step she took, the confidence she had once lacked began to form. Avery no longer needed to prove anything to others. She had already proven, first to herself, that value doesn't come from what others think, but from what we carry in our hearts. She had discovered that true strength doesn't lie in shouting for attention, but in doing what is right even when no one is watching. And this, more than any award, was what she would carry with her from everything she had lived. But what touched her the most now wasn't the victory, but the possibility of being a light for others who feel invisible, just as she had felt so many times. What she had achieved wasn't just about personal success, but about showing everyone that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you have. What matters is what you choose to be. And by doing so, Avery became much more than a scientist. She became a symbol of resilience and courage. However, as she looked toward the future, one final question lingered in the back of her mind. What more could she achieve now that she knew the power of her own voice? The answer, she knew, was on the path ahead, still full of challenges but also infinite possibilities. And with one last look at the stars, Avery smiled, certain that the impossible was just a matter of perspective. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear this.